Can you hear me? We on? Good morning. Last week we picked up where Brother David Parks left off in Genesis chapter 27, talking about Jacob and Esau. Jacob deceived his brother. Esau had hate in his heart, and we talked a little bit about how we couldn't blame Esau for being upset to at least a certain extent. That emotions are human nature, but it's how you act on your emotions. It's how you learn to control your emotions. And we saw that Esau took that a little too far. He wanted to kill his brother. And so we talked a little bit about Jacob fleeing to Laban, and then kind of getting a taste of his own medicine with Laban deceiving Jacob. And so we're picking up today, and we're in chapter 11 of our devotional book, chapter 11. And in Genesis, we are in chapter 29. So chapter 11 of your devotional book and chapter 29 of Genesis. And our key verse today is actually from Genesis 31:3. Then the Lord said to Jacob, "Go back to the land of your fathers and to your relatives, and I will be with you." Would someone like to read Genesis 29:31 through 35?
31 through 35.
Yes, sir.
Now the Lord saw that Leah was unloved, and he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. Leah conceived and bore a son, and named him Reuben. For she said, "Because the Lord has seen my affliction, surely now my husband will love me." Then she conceived again and bore a son, and said, "Because the Lord has heard that I am unloved, he has therefore given me this son also." So she named him Simeon. She conceived again and bore a son, and said, "Now this time my husband will become attached to me, because I have borne him 3 sons." Therefore he was named Levi. And she conceived again and bore a son, and said, "This time I will praise the Lord." Therefore the name of him Judah. Then she stopped bearing.
So we're going to see there's some family tension here. Leah has something that Rachel wants, and Rachel has something Leah wants. What Leah has is she is able to conceive. But what she is lacking is Jacob's love. We're told multiple times that Leah was unloved. And actually some translations use the word hated. So it was a strong discontent from Jacob. Jacob did not want anything to do with Leah. That's not who his love was.
He must have had something to do with her, because she got pregnant 4 times.
Yeah.
He didn't hate her that much.
He wanted to be, like we talked with, what's that?
The word hate in the Bible kind of means to love less.
It can, yeah.
So love the less it necessarily is bad.
Yeah. We talked last chapter about Jacob wanting to be with Rachel, and we talked a little bit about that was his love. And I think the author, we debated something with the author last week about that. But Leah wanted to be loved. And on the flip side, Rachel was loved. Rachel felt that, but she was barren. And we know in that society, that was often looked down upon if you could not conceive. So they each had their own issues there. If we want to turn to the devotional book, most of us at some time in our lives have had to face an unpleasant situation. It is never easy and is often something that we would rather not do, but are unable to avoid. For Jacob, the unpleasant situation was returning home. Time had passed since Jacob left home, and there was no way for him to know what faced him on his return. He had cheated his brothers, deceived his father, and left home quickly to escape his brother's plot to kill him. Now it was time to return. So Jacob packed up his family and headed to Canaan. Fortunately for Jacob, God was still with him and blessed him, even in this unpleasant situation. Before we do any more reading, we can go ahead and talk about question number 1. What was God's original plan for marriage and the home?
One man, one woman.
One man and one woman. If you want to turn quickly to Genesis chapter 2, when it's first mentioned. Verse 18, and the Lord God said, it is not good that man should be alone. I will make him a helper comparable to him. And then in verses 21 and 22, and the Lord God caused a deep sleep to fall on Adam, and he slept, and he took one of his ribs and closed up the flesh in its place. Then the rib which the Lord God had taken from man, he made into a woman, and he brought her to the man. And Adam said, this is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman because she was taken out of man. Therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. So that was God's original plan for marriage. It wasn't to have multiple wives. It wasn't to marry a pair of sisters. In today's world, it would be very culturally acceptable for a man to marry a man or a woman to marry a woman. Different things are acceptable in different cultures, but God's plan remains the same. And the second part of that question, how does the story of Jacob's family illustrate the wisdom of God's plan? Jealousy and hatred. Yep.
I wonder, in the Leah's case, if we remember the deceit going on, Laban deceived Jacob to take on the firstborn. Leah was firstborn, so she's in that culture, firstborn. You wonder if there's a little jealousy that Jacob liked more than Leah, but so from the get-go, Leah may have wanted to footstep that, hey, I'm the firstborn. You should love me. That's the way our society is, our culture is. I think she'd kind of fall into that too.
I think she was, yeah. Right.
But she would follow on what Dad wanted.
Right.
But the deception started earlier on than that.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. I have a few things written down on that, but simply put, sin does not derail God's plan. So despite human error and all the dysfunctions that we have, if God really wants something to get done, it's going to happen. Okay. We're going to look at back in Genesis chapter 30. And we'll do a little more reading this week. Would someone like to read the first 10 verses or so of Genesis 30? Okay.
Now when Rachel saw that she bore Jacob no children, Rachel envied her sister and said to Jacob, give me children or else I die. Jacob's anger was aroused against Rachel, and he said, am I in the place of God, who has withheld from you the fruit of the womb? And she said, here is my maid Bilhah. Go into her, and she will bear a child on my knees, that I also may have children
Then Leah said, "A troop comes." So she called his name Gad. And Leah's maid Zilpah bore Jacob a second son. Then Leah said, "I am happy, for the daughters will call me blessed." So she called his name Asher. Now Reuben went in the days of wheat harvest and found mandrakes in the field and brought them to his mother Leah. Then Rachel said to Leah, "Please give me some of your son's mandrakes." But she said to her, "Is it a small matter that you have taken away my husband? Would you take away my son's mandrakes also?" And Rachel said, "Therefore he will lie with you tonight for your son's mandrakes." When Jacob came out of the field in the evening, Leah went out to meet him and said, "You must come in to me, for I have surely hired you with my son's mandrakes." And he lay with her that night. And God listened to Leah, and she conceived and bore Jacob a fifth son. Leah said, "God has given me my wages, because I have given my maid to my husband." So she called his name Issachar. Then Leah conceived again and bore Jacob a sixth son. And Leah said, "God has endowed me with a good endowment. Now my husband will dwell with me, because I have borne him 6 sons." So she called his name Zebulun. Afterward she bore a daughter and called her name Dinah. Then God remembered Rachel and listened to her, and opened her womb. And she conceived and bore a son, and said, "God has taken away my reproach." So she called his name Joseph, and said, "The Lord shall add to me another son." If we want to look at question number 2 in the Devo book, why did Leah and Rachel feel it was so important to have children?
That was the culture back then. Why don't women have any standing except to have children, take care of the home? There's a lot of competition between the two.
Yeah. That was the thought process. That was the culture back then in the Middle East. They placed value on women, primarily on if they could bear children or not. And it was especially good if it was a son. That's what they wanted. Yeah, there are a lot of people like that.
And I think the one thing that you get denied, you want all the more.
Yeah.
Well, here is obviously a competition between two women. Because they were eager to enter into the power, well, I'll show you up, sis. I'm gonna take my maid and show you that she can do the same thing that you can't do.
Yes. Yeah. There was. It definitely seemed like it was a bit of a competition. In what ways did this desire for children lead to problems in the family? Yes. Yeah, I had something I wrote down. It was like an herb that people in that culture, they kind of associated that with conception. And so that was something that maybe was customary for that to be in the room during that time. Yeah. Yeah, I thought that was interesting too. It said it had a strong aroma. So.
This shows the competition between the two wives. Shows better not to have two wives, but of course Jacob got tricked into marrying Leah, or he married Rachel to begin with.
That's right.
But
Yeah.
there was a lot of friction between the two women because they both wanted to have children by him.
Right. I also had, again, Rachel desired what Leah had, and Leah desired what Rachel had. So there was a little jealousy on both sides there. And they were both desperate. They were both desperate for children, and that desperation led them to both have their maids lie down with Jacob too.
If we go back, if such strong a love, affection for both of them, you would think that Rachel would have a little bit more confidence that Jacob loved her
Right.
without any other reason to have for the love. And he even told Laban several times that Rachel was who he wanted. You would have thought she could have read into that nothing could have stopped that love. But she let her sister wear in on her.
Yeah, I agree. And we don't usually see like a romantic type love described that deeply in the Bible. We see God's love, Jesus' love, but it really stressed how Jacob loved Rachel, and it was almost like love at first sight, which again we don't really see that much in the Bible. So
It was also interesting there where Rachel said to Jacob, "Give me children or I'll die," and he got angry with her
yeah, he did.
for doing that. And he said, "Am I God in the place of God?" So she sent her maiden into him to have children for her.
Right.
But I thought it was interesting, because she was the favorite, but he didn't like what she said either,
Yeah, that's a good point. He got angry too. The tension wasn't just between the two sisters, it was between Jacob too. Okay. If we want to go back to our devotional book on page 66. After his marriage to Leah and Rachel, we haven't read this yet, have we? We didn't read this yet, I think. After his marriage to Leah and Rachel, Jacob's family quickly grew. Unfortunately, rather than a description of a happy home, we read in these verses about what we would today call a dysfunctional family. Jacob's unintentional marriage to the two daughters of Laban led to many problems. Favoritism, jealousy, and competition between these two wives are apparent in this brief account. From both the Old and New Testaments, we see that God intended for marriage to be between one man and one woman. At times in the Old Testament, such as here in the case of Jacob, God did allow more than one wife. Why did God do this? We don't know, and no explanation is given. It is obvious that Leah was not Jacob's favorite wife. Are we surprised? Jacob's love was for Rachel, and he was tricked by Laban into marrying Leah. This was hardly the best situation for a loving relationship. Even the birth of 4 sons did not change Jacob's attitude toward Leah. Like Sarah and Rebekah, Rachel remained childless for several years. This must have been a bitter disappointment for her. From our perspective, we can see that this was no accident. God was involved, and when these women did become pregnant, it was obvious that God was at work in their lives. Rachel, like Sarah before her, became impatient and substituted her servant as a surrogate mother. This led to additional children, but also to further tension in the family. Emphasizing only the family problems, however, can cause us to miss the importance of these verses. The original intention of Genesis was to trace the history of the Jewish people, and recounting the births of these sons born to Jacob is an important part of that history. These sons of Jacob eventually became the heads of tribes of Israel that led to the birth of the Jewish nation, and later through them, God sent his own son into the world. Are there any thoughts on that so far?
We know a little later that Jacob's name is changed to Israel, so that's the start of the nation of Israel. So it's important that this history, really, for us to know this history.
That's right.
And then, of course, Jesus comes out of one of the tribes, so.
God's working through the whole thing, taking the mistakes or whatever you want to call them and using them. He's going to accomplish his will.
Yeah, God's still working through human error. And you think about some of the most impactful generations in the Bible. This is one of them right here, where it goes Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and then the 12 sons. These are some of the most well-respected men and women in the entire Bible, and they all had their mess-ups too.
Good for us to
Yeah,
It was today we put them on television.
yeah.
So I was thinking this is for soap opera.
Sister wives.
You would.
And any tension would have just drawn the ratings up.
Yeah. With social media too, everyone will know instantly.
Oh, we got social media.
Yeah.
I wonder, how do you think the maids felt? I mean, they had children here, and yet they were just kind of to give their children over to the
Yeah.
demon, and she claimed them as children. I don't know. Yeah, gets the name of them.
But maybe going into that, if you're a maid, you might kind of have that expectation because that was what some of the other rich women did in that society too. I mean, this wasn't the first time that a maid was being used for that. So,
It's also part of their livelihood, wasn't it, to be in that household, probably to be around the children even.
right.
It seems like Jacob is just almost an unwilling participant in some of this, but not you're gonna lay with this one.
Yeah.
Not you're gonna lay with this one.
Yeah, and he just kind of went along with it. Yeah. I think there was an expectation for him by society standards with Leah since he was married to her. Again, I know he didn't love her, but there might have been that societal role where he felt like he had to lie with her. But with the other two maids, I don't know.
Well, but we also have to realize the original promise. The promise to Abraham that he was going to be a father of many nations, of many people. Well, that got carried through from Isaac through Jacob. And I think Jacob still understood that I don't know how willing he was, but another son means
Yeah.
God's coming through with a promise.
Yeah.
I'm supposed to be the father of many.
And he,
I don't know.
and he was, yeah. Yeah.
Like Abraham, he did have more than one son, basically Isaac's the one they talk about, and Isaac only had, per se, Esau and Jacob.
Yeah.
And Jacob's the one we're talking about now, so he's got 12. So
Yeah.
we're beginning to,
He ran up the count quite a bit. Yeah. He did. Okay. Let's see. Check. For time's sake, we won't read any of chapter 31. It talks about Jacob leaving back for home, but we'll go ahead and continue in the devotional book. It's on page 67. It had been about 20 years since Jacob had hurriedly left home. He had gone to his mother's family as his father had told him. He had worked for his uncle Laban twice as long as he had agreed in order to marry Rachel. The previous chapter gives us some insight into Laban's less than honest dealings with him, but also shows how God has blessed Jacob during this time as he had promised. Jacob had become exceedingly prosperous as a result of God's blessings. In the beginning of chapter 31, we see that Laban and his sons had become jealous and envious of Jacob's success, and Jacob noticed that their attitude toward him had changed. It was no doubt already on his mind when God spoke to Jacob and told him to go back home to his family. Rachel and Leah felt that their father had not been fair with them either, and agreed with Jacob that it was time to leave. Jacob prepared to move his family, servants, and animals back to Canaan. He did not, however, inform his father-in-law of his plans. Jacob had matured in many ways since running away from home, but he was still up to his old tricks and attempted to deceive Laban. The latter part of chapter 31 gives an account of Laban pursuing and overtaking Jacob. Laban was angry and even threatened Jacob. In the end, Laban and Jacob made a covenant. Laban returned home while Jacob continued his journey through Canaan in his encounter with Esau, whom he had also deceived. And so that leads us to question 3 in our devotional book. Jacob seems to have had faith in God, but still relied upon himself. What examples of this do we see in this lesson?
Well, first of all, God promised Jacob through the conversation in the Jacob's ladder deal that he was going to be protected, that God's going to be with him no matter what. And obviously with the fear of running into his brother Esau, I guess he's afraid he's going to lose his life, and God promised the other way, so he decided to help the situation out.
All right. Yeah.
He fathered all the children. You know, to me, that seems like he was trying to help. I don't know what he was trying to do, but to make it, he fathered all those children with different ways, or wives.
Yeah. Yeah, both good points. It's also, I think it's important to note that Jacob was, he was rich at this point. He'd had money and status before he left with his family, but he went on his own and he made his own riches. And we're told that the rest of the family got a little jealous because Jacob was doing so well. And so maybe that gave him a little big of a head. Maybe not. I know that's, you know, if everything's going right for us at some point, we're having a good few weeks, we're having a good month, and everything seems to be going right, sometimes we get a little cocky too. Almost like we're, you know, unstoppable, and
That we can do without God for a while.
yeah. And that's just us, and sometimes we need to be brought down to earth a little bit too. So, okay. We are, if someone would like to read Genesis chapter 32, verses 22 through 32.
Now he arose that same night and took his 2 wives and his 2 maids and his 11 children and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. He took them and sent them across the stream, and he sent across whatever he had. Then Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until daybreak. When he saw that he had not prevailed against him, he touched the socket of his thigh. So the socket of Jacob's thigh was dislocated while he wrestled with him. Then he said, "Let me go, for the dawn is breaking." But he said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." So he said to him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Jacob." And he said, "Your name shall no longer be Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with men and have prevailed." I can't remember.
Through 32, yeah.
Yeah. Then Jacob asked him and said, "Please tell me your name." But he said, "Why is it that you ask my name?" And he blessed him there. So Jacob named the place Peniel, for he said, "I have seen God face to face, yet my life has been preserved." Now the sun rose upon him just as he crossed over Peniel, and he was limping on his thigh. Therefore to this day the sons of Israel do not eat the sinew of the hip, which is on the socket of the thigh, because he touched the socket of Jacob's thigh in the sinew of the hip.
So right before this, Jacob and his family decided to go back to Canaan, and they're making that trek, and Jacob actually sends his family out before him. And he was worried at first. He was worried for his life. But we're told in chapter 32, verse 2, when Jacob saw them, he said, "This is God's camp." And he called the name of that place Mahanaim. So maybe at that point he realized that God's armies are around them, that he's going to be protected. That leads us to question number 4 that we have. Jacob physically struggled with God. In what ways can a person emotionally and spiritually struggle with God? why do bad things happen to good people? That's a very common thought today. It's a good thought. I mean, it makes you think a little bit.
Maybe just being a Christian is a struggle.
Yeah. What else?
I think God's ways, being higher than our ways, makes it really hard for us to understand sometimes why God has had something happen or not allowed something to happen, or, that we think is so logically, that this would be the best thing,
Yeah.
and it's being denied us, or we're waiting, and I think that could be an emotional spiritual struggle.
It's especially a hard conversation to have with people who don't share your faith, because they're not thinking in those terms. So it's very hard to just have a simple conversation with someone as to why God allowed their child to have cancer, or allowed their friend to get killed in a car wreck. And we've talked about that some here in different classes with human free will and God allowing free will to happen around the world. But it's a very hard conversation to have, especially with people who don't share our same beliefs. So, and we could talk for hours on that. I also have that doubting your own faith can be an example of spiritual struggle, emotional struggle. Living by your own feelings sometimes instead of living by your faith in God's word is another one. Good. Where are we at here? Okay. Would someone like to read under Jacob receives a new name on page 68? Good. Thanks, Greg. For time's sake, we won't read any of Genesis 33, but as we know, Jacob and Esau meet, and Jacob was a little worried about that, but it kind of turned into a big family reunion. That was, Esau's first chance to meet all of Jacob's kin, and Esau forgave Jacob. Jacob blessed Esau, so it did work out. On the bottom of page 68, was it going to be a reunion or a battle? Jacob was not sure how his brother would respond. He made preparations and took precautions. Eventually, Jacob faced Esau alone by himself. In a sense, this is an indication of his maturity, as Jacob finally was taking responsibility for his actions. Esau went to meet Jacob with 400 men. Seeing the cloud of dust as Esau approached must have filled Jacob with fear. Fortunately for Jacob, Esau's anger and hatred had vanished, and he greeted him warmly. It is obvious from this account that God had blessed both of the sons of Isaac. Esau commanded a small army, and Jacob's wealth is apparent in the gifts that he had sent to Esau. Esau returned to his home, and Jacob and his household finally reached Canaan. Jacob bought land and settled near the city of Shechem. Verse 20 is especially important to note. After settling in the land, Jacob, like Abraham before him, built an altar and worshiped God. Jacob's life had come full circle, and he had returned to the land that God had promised him. So question five says, what is the importance of Jacob buying land in Canaan, and how does this relate to the promises that God gave to him?
First of all, God promised Abraham that he would be given this land in Canaan. So sooner or later, it's got to come under possession of the Israelite nation, and that comes through Jacob.
Right. Came back to the family. Like the author said, it was kind of a full circle moment for them.
I wonder if Jacob's wealth had something to do with soothing Esau out, because they left on the terms the fact that Jacob supposedly took the possessions away from Esau, being the firstborn, and Esau was mad about that. So maybe the fact that, well, Jacob's given me some of that wealth back that I wanted, so maybe I'll just feel good about my brother.
Right.
I think he had
Could
just
be.
held down over the years.
Yeah.
Realized what was important.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good thoughts.
All the years they missed.
Right. The last question we have there, we have seen that God appeared to Jacob on more than one occasion. What was the significance of each of these?
Each time, didn't God say, I will be with you?
Jacob's left.
Yeah, I think maybe more so than anything, they were reminders to Jacob that he's going to be with him. And he was reaffirming God's covenant made to that family. And
Didn't have the written word back then, so these people in the Bible knew the promises and stuff,
right.
like a reminder.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I see a parallel here. I just thought of a while ago. The wrestling with God and the change of the name. I think of Saul becoming Paul. In some ways, Saul wrestles with Jesus on the road to Damascus.
Right.
And his eyes get infected to the point where there's, again, a touch from God in a way. And his name, of course, we know it's the same. Paul is just another way of saying Saul, but he becomes Paul. The nice parallel right there. That God's always into everybody's lives in some way.
Yeah, that's a good comparison. Anything else? There's nobody back there to ring the bell, but I think it's 10:15. So thank you for a good class, and we'll pick up on chapter 12 next week.